I keep a picture of all my victims. By my oh my pancakes. The first victim was Emily Stout. She was the sweetest thing coming up from the South Carolina to make it on Broadway. I met her at a subway station. Her blonde hair was gorgeous, really well cared for. Her blue eyes were so cute, and then her smile would easily brighten up your day. Unfortunately, everything about her turned repulsive when I got to her. When the police found her, most of her teeth were missing. Her hair was ripped to shreds, and her eyes popped out of their sockets. Every time I look at her picture, it brings a smile to my face. Until I remember how she looked when I left her. The next victim was Roger Parks. He was this big-shot stockbroker. He put most of his money in stocks because he believed that's where all money would grow. Well, finally one day, his stocks went down hard. Lost all his money in the 2008 depression. He looked so depressed when I made my attack, like he was ready to die. The police found him the same way they found the first victim, but he had his briefcase still. Inside it was all his papers he needed, and the most disturbing thing was that he had a picture of his family on him. Maybe he just wanted one last goodbye. The third victim was Victoria Smith. She was this 40-something mother of 3. She was definitely keeping good shape at her age. She would always complain about how her kids didn't have time for her anymore, and how her husband wouldn't pay her any attention. They found her with her guts pulled out of her body, and her body becoming jelly. I have her picture with her family. The family that didn't give her enough attention. The fourth victim, that was Kelly Soprano. She worked the ticket booth at the subway station. I saw her every day she worked after school. Pretty little thing, her brunette hair was amazing. Her smile always brightened me up when I had my darkest days. And she always was down to talk whatever. I wished I never had touched her. Looking back, she was the victim I regretted killing the most. She was just at the wrong place at the wrong time. Her picture is her with a dog filter on her face, and she's wearing her Metro uniform. The fifth and most recent victim was Todd Lebowski. He was this wannabe YouTuber performing stupid stunts to get views. I watched his videos after the killing, and he seemed like an entitled D-bag. His last stunt was the worst one he could think of. He was getting my attention, trying to tick me off. Well, he got what he wanted, to tick me off. His body was the worst out of all of them. They couldn't even recognize who he was. They had to go off dental records to see who he was. Somehow, the camera was intaked, so they looked at the footage. What they saw was me trying to tell him to get off the track before I ran him over with the subway car. After every death, everyone tells you it's not your fault. But I can't help just remembering them in their last moments. I started to feel better when I took pictures of them and hung them around in the subway cars I drive for the day. I went to everyone's funeral to make sure that they had someone there to remember them. Emily had to go into prostitution, became a heavy user of drugs. Roger became affiliated with loan sharks and made a hole too big to come out of. Victoria lost everything. Her kids went out of state. Her husband was a gay man the whole time. The cherry on top, of course, was that she was found out to have skin cancer, and she had only months to live. Kelly was a victim of bullying. Her note said she loved everyone that made her smile. She even mentioned me. Todd seemed a stunt gone wrong, but actually he was battling depression, and his stunts were a way of trying to end it all. To the people who are battling depression, or are going through a rough spot in their life, just know that someone will remember you fondly. Even if it's the guy who sees you in your final seconds. I'll never listen to a creepypasta in the shower again. By James Higgins. So, I don't really know where to start with this one, because it scared the hell out of me. It was 2 nights ago, and I had just gotten home from school, really tired, and looking forward to my dinner and a nice hot shower. While the dinner was cooking, it was a ritual of mine to take a shower. Then I'd get out, and the smell of crispy chicken and roast potatoes would glide upstairs. It was my favorite time of the day, finishing school. The thought of toxic homework hadn't entered my mind yet, and the hunger and sense to relax was just starting to kick in. There's a calmness about this time of day. I remember I always used to love washing everything twice in the shower, not because I'm a clean freak or anything, but just because I felt like the first time I washed my hair and body, I felt like I was washing the day's dirt off, and the second time I went over myself with the thick shampoo and silky conditioner, I felt as though my stresses and anxieties from the day were being washed away and lifted from my mind, as if the clouds of sorrow from my head were opening up, and the negativity was raining down and washing away in the drain, never to be seen again, and only to be replaced by new infectious negative thoughts of the next day. But of course, I'd deal with those worries in my next shower. Another thing I always have done was listened to a creepypasta while I showered. It calmed me, in a sense, and scared me too in a fun way. I got my shower to the right temperature and found a new Jeff the Killer story. He was always my favorite guy to hear about, so I played it, and as the video tried to properly connect and started to buffer, I got in the shower. "I'm looking right at you," I heard coming from the video, but it didn't sound exactly like Jeff the Killer or like any of my regular YouTubers. But I shrugged and kept listening. "Do you know what happens when you die?" the voice asked in an excited type of way. The question sent shivers up my spine. Just the tone in which it was asked scared the crap out of me. I began to wash the shampoo from my hair when the story took a strange turn. "Eternal screaming, eternal screaming, eternal screaming," the voice began to repeat over and over again, sounding increasingly psychotic with every time it was said. The feeling of dread and fear grew inside me to a point where I felt I was going to have a panic attack. And then it stopped, but breathing was still playing. And then nothing. Then out of nowhere, when I thought the video was over, "Mary Phillips is screaming." That was my grandmother's name. She had died this day last year. I fell out of the shower in a blind panic, dried off my hands, and reached for my phone. When I realized something, the video was still buffering from before my shower. The video had never played. A Pathetic Wretch by Unsettling Stories. After her husband left, all she did was cry. Cry, cry, cry. Noon, cry. 10 p.m., cry. 3 a.m., cry. Her pitiful bleating would pour through the thin wall between our apartments and drive me out of my mind. I couldn't sleep. My work suffered. I stared, eyes wide with restless hatred, at the ceiling in my uncomfortable bed as night after night was stolen from me. Pounding on the wall did nothing but cause her to cry harder. Called to the obese building superintendent brought castigation, naught to my neighbor, but to me. "How dare you be so heartless?" the super chided. In the rare cases she wasn't speaking around a mouthful of food, it still sounded as if she were. "Her husband has abandoned her." Look, I can't sleep. I can't even think," I protested. The thing on the other end of the line huffed. "Get some earplugs," she suggested, and hung up. This went on for months. Like any man in my situation, I reached the end of my rope, and in a way, so did my neighbor. 3 weeks ago, I knocked on her door. I was holding a bouquet of flowers. The teary wretch let me in. Her eyes were red, her nose was chapped and peeling. Used tissues littered the floor. Disgusting. When the door closed behind me, I was on her. She was tiny and weak, no match for a man of my stature, or a man of my strength. I produced a rope I'd hidden in my coat. I looped it around her neck and hanged her from a beam in the kitchen. Before I left, I placed a chair on its side underneath her. It was more effortless than I'd fantasized. After that, she didn't cry anymore. I slept like a baby for the first time in longer than I can remember. A few days later, I was sitting at my kitchen table, enjoying a meal in peace. I heard heavy footsteps coming down the hall. I knew those quaking footfalls. It was the monstrous superintendent. She stopped at the door and knocked. She waited a few minutes and knocked again, calling her name. When there was no answer, I heard a key in the lock. The door creaked open, and a few clomping steps later, I heard a scream. I was delighted. I'd been worrying the corpse would begin to stink up my apartment if too much time went by. The creature stopped screaming after a few seconds and galumphed out of the apartment and banged her meaty fists on my door. Mr. Peel, please let me in. Something terrible has happened." I wiped my mouth and folded my napkin, then let the thing in. "Mrs. LaSalle hanged herself," the superintendent bellowed. Her wet eyes bulged with shock. "We should call the police," I proposed, doing a very passable impression of a surprised and saddened man. "That poor woman." The police came and went. The superintendent told them all they needed to know. A suicide. Case closed. Problem solved. My following days were peaceful and productive. I slept easily and woke rested. For a time. The last few nights, my slumber has been disturbed by noises that, until recently, were far too soft to identify. They crept in on the edges of my hearing threshold, gentle but insistent, just enough to keep me from drifting off. I called the porcine superintendent and was unsurprised by her unwillingness to investigate.
Probably the pipes, she belched, and let the matter die at the hands of a dial tone. The other night, the sound was louder. I pressed my ear to the wall I'd shared with the sobbing wretch and heard nothing remarkable. I rose from my bed and walked through the house. Once in the kitchen, a whisper hissed like a rush of steam. "Mr. Peel." I jumped and bristled. "Who's there?" I demanded. The whisper didn't repeat. I checked the door. It was still locked. The windows were shut. I made a final loop of the apartment, then returned to bed. My sleep was uneasy. Yesterday was uneventful. My day was productive, and night fell without incident. I went to bed without thinking of the previous night's whisper. Around 4 a.m., my sleep was again disturbed. It was that indefinable sound again. Now it was coming from the direction I recognized. It was the other side of the wall, my former neighbor's wall. I pressed the side of my head against the sheetrock and heard what I swear was laughter. Innocent, gentle laughter. In the darkness of night, however, the innocence of the sound was sinister, ominous. I knocked on the wall. "Who is there?" I asked. My voice was timid and demonstrated a weakness I loathed. There was no response aside from more laughter. The sound moved to other parts of the neighbor's apartment. My head ached from pressing it against the wall, but I needed to know who had the audacity to taunt me. Was it the disgusting superintendent? Had she gotten into the whiskey again? The laughter diminished as it moved into an area too far into the neighbor's apartment for me to hear from my bedroom. I got out of bed and went after it. It followed the wall we shared, and soon it was just on the other side of the front of the room. "Mr. Peel." The whisper came from outside my front door. I leapt to the peephole and looked through. No one was there. The laughter persisted. It was low now, and it rang through my apartment with such intensity my wine glasses rattled in their cabinet. "Who is it?" I shouted. "Who's there?" I swung open the door, ready to confront the bastard who dared terrorize me. The laughter ceased. The hall was empty. "Don't test me," I called to no one in particular. "Don't try." I backed in and slammed the door. My hands shook. I needed a drink. I passed through the front of my room into the kitchen, towards the liquor cabinet. I stopped in the doorway. Hanging on the beam in my kitchen was a rope. At its end, dangling like a rotting pear on a tree, was a noose. A single giggle came from the direction of the rope. "Soon, Mr. Peel," a voice hissed in my ear. "Soon."